need to be very clear about this. Everyone deserves to walk safely down Roosevelt Avenue.
The 2-mile stretch of Roosevelt Avenue that runs through Jackson Heights is the target of a joint city and state crackdown called Operation Restore.
So a working-class neighborhood here in New York has been taken over by gangs, and residents say they don't even feel safe walking down the street. But although there's been a massive deployment of police officers here, which has led to reductions in crime over the last week, the city has already announced this police surge is temporary. And fearful residents say that once the police leave, the criminal element that's infested their backyards is going to come back.
Residents and business owners say they are fed up with the illegal dumping and trafficking that is happening in front of them every day.
Sadly, there's two sides to Roosevelt Avenue. There's Roosevelt Avenue by day, and there's Roosevelt Avenue by night.
My child and I had to walk through Roosevelt Avenue to go to an event. I had to keep him distracted.
Some of the so-called massage parlors, they run 24 hours.
And Chief of Detectives Joseph Kenny says the influx of migrants is fueling the problem.
And with that, you see some gang activity.
A new warning about a dangerous Venezuelan prison gang making deeper inroads in the U.S. The Department of Homeland Security says members of the notorious Tren de Aragua gang are increasingly drawn to sanctuary cities.
They built their entire enterprise off the backs of over 8 million Venezuelans fleeing Venezuela and other countries in South America. They're going to seize apartments. They're going to seize abandoned buildings. They're going to take over the migrant care centers.
We know that we are in a crisis moment right now.
So local officials are already demanding more assistance in advance of the end of the police surge. But what nobody's talking about is that the gangs exploiting New York's asylum crisis, which is a citywide crisis, have made the problems in this one particular part of town even worse. And what we have here in Queens is a neighborhood that's always had elevated levels of crime because it's been neglected by city leadership for a long time, which has turned what was once a middle-class paradise into a lawless environment ripe for exploitation by a dangerous Venezuelan gang with criminal ambitions beyond anything our leaders ever thought possible. Which is a shame for both local residents of this neighborhood and asylum seekers, because although 212,000 asylum seekers have fled to New York without the intention of joining gangs or committing crimes, they and local residents are now being afflicted by the same gang that's famous for terrorizing many people throughout South and Central America. And now they're doing it again in sanctuary cities all over America, where there are laws which help the lawless evade federal authorities who may be looking for them, which is especially bad once you realize this gang's specialty is human exploitation. Which brings us to the real reason why we've got criminal activity taking over middle-class neighborhoods that just won't seem to stop, even during a police surge. This activity is fueled by the influx of asylum seekers to New York City, not because the asylum seekers themselves are bad, but because as a sanctuary city with soft on-crime laws, New York allows bad people to prey on them just as they've been doing outside of America for years. And as you're about to see, after we arrest these gang members, they often get released, but then they go back home, living in a shelter next to the very people they've decided to target. So this long, skinny tower here, it's called the Candler Building. It's a former office. It's been converted into a shelter for asylum seekers, single adults, holds around 400 people. And although there have been reports of gang activity in facilities like this, if you look around the streets and the immediate area, we don't see the signs of gang activity here like we do across the water in Queens. That's because here in Midtown, there's a big police presence. There are enough resources here to get a handle on crime to a greater extent than there is in an area of the city that has been neglected for years. And residents are worried that once the police pull out after this 90-day surge ends, which is already almost half over at this point, that the criminal element that had set up shop there and had taken over is just gonna come right back.
The 2-mile stretch of Roosevelt Avenue that runs through Jackson Heights is the target of a joint city and state crackdown tackling quality of life issues and crime. But on Wednesday, lawmakers unveiled a 7-point plan to improve the...
So this particular part of town, Roosevelt Avenue in Queens, when I went there to check things out for myself to see what it was actually like, I was shocked for a few reasons. First, the whole place felt like an outdoor market where you could buy just about anything because everything was being sold in some form or another on the sidewalk. Also, all the people that I saw, they all appeared to be well-meaning and nice. And although you could kind of tell that what was going on definitely wasn't by the book, you didn't feel like you were in a poverty-stricken part of town. No, it definitely felt like a middle-class neighborhood. It still retains that. And one big difference between this part of town and Midtown, where we are right now, is that I didn't see any unhoused individuals or anybody who was visibly using a substance on the side of the street that they shouldn't be using. But one thing's for sure, when you look in the windows of some of the nearby businesses, you see signs and photos of people who they say have stolen things from them. There's a definite theft problem at a lot of the legitimate shops there, and as it turns out, those items are being resold on the streets, in some cases in front of the very businesses that were just robbed. There have been articles written about this. Apparently all of this stuff comes from stores, department stores, many local businesses in the area, and this is where the gang connection to some of the crime that's going on here really starts to come out, because you've got stuff that's been stolen from Macy's, that's been stolen from Home Depot, and it's kind of like all the stolen goods that get taken from anywhere in town wind up over there and are being resold by people who, according to the New York Post, in many cases recently came to this country as asylum seekers. And as you observe these outdoor markets and how they operate, you can get the sense that there are people watching out for police in case they decide to show up. You've also got vans that have merchandise inside of them with the doors open, which could conceivably be quickly closed if there were a police raid or some sort of increased police presence on the block. And some of the women that I saw selling tools that came out of suitcases on the side of the sidewalk, well, they got those suitcases from men who handed them to them. And that's where things started to click, that there are many forms of possible exploitation going on out there in broad daylight, and it all can be traced back to these gangs operating in the very shelters that are supposed to help people.
We know that we are in a crisis moment right now.
The plan calls for a number of major changes, including more inspections and enforcement by city and state agencies, better lighting under the elevated 7 line, and requiring hotels and...
So residents here, they're really worried, and they're worried because they understand that once the police surge that is here, which has already been announced as temporary, ends, the criminal element is just going to come back. And now they've got a 7-point plan to try and fix their neighborhood, which requires permanent solutions from the city. And what they want is a constant presence of city resources in their neighborhood at all times, just like here in Midtown, near many of the shelters where asylum seekers are staying. They want their neighborhood to look and feel just like this one, which isn't neglected by the city, even though it's in the exact same city. And even though we're dealing with a gang of criminals that are experts in human exploitation, they can't get away with the stuff that they do in Queens down here. Midtown is completely the opposite of the problems these residents of this middle-class neighborhood are dealing with. Yet in Queens, we see their illegal businesses all over the place operating in physical structures where there might be a license that says the business is legitimate when in fact it isn't. Here's photos of a recent raid. The Venezuelan gang we're talking about here is Tren de Aragua, and they'll do what they can to exploit everyone they come into contact with, which is very bad news for a city like New York that is a sanctuary city dealing with a massive humanitarian crisis. And the asylum crisis here is an opportunity for this gang that has not been lost upon them. They don't just locate victims in these shelters, they also find new members in them as well. They forcefully recruit people to do their dirty work all over town. And they tell people that if they don't join their gang as foot soldiers or workers of some kind, they will go after their families back home in Venezuela. And if there's a type of crime that can be committed in a city like New York, you can bet they're involved in it. There have been reports of robbery crews disguised as delivery riders marauding through the streets, stealing things from people on sidewalks. And when you see a woman who is on the side of the street pulling things out of a suitcase or backpack that a man handed to her, and then she starts selling them to people, you've got to wonder, is she doing that by choice? Is that what she really wants to do? Or is she forced to be in that situation? It looks terrible. But what residents of Queens want in their 7-point plan is to make sure that all of the businesses in Roosevelt Avenue are licensed, and that the streets are adequately clean, and that there is enforcement of unlicensed street vending. And those would all be good things, because allowing unlicensed street vending sets up an avenue for exploitation that this gang can use. And it's the same thing with the illegal businesses. If you're going to allow those to operate and commit crime in broad daylight, they're only going to multiply.
And requiring hotels and massage parlors to obtain licenses in order to operate.
Right now, there's no licensing for hotels. That is where criminal activity thrives, in unlicensed hotels.
Now, in order to move this plan forward, the community leaders say...
So the mere idea that you could have an unlicensed hotel on the side of the street that is not actually a hotel but looks like one from the outside and has people coming in and out of it on the side of the street, that's extremely frightening. Especially when you read stories about how this TDA gang is directly involved with human smuggling operations that take place outside of the United States. And it reveals that by having bad people live in our shelter system, the entire purpose of that system is invalidated. Because if the goal of these facilities is to help people get on their feet and take their shot at the American dream, how exactly do they go about doing that when criminals live down the hall from their family? There's nothing humane about an operation that has wanted fugitives living down the hall from families with little kids, or even down the hall from people who are here for a better life. And none of our elected officials are making the connection between crime in underserved parts of town and the gang-related aspects of the asylum crisis and how they're co-opting it. And what that means is there's no way this police surge is going to be successful in Queens. So, the longer the asylum crisis here in New York continues, the more we learn that the two things many people say are responsible for this crisis, New York's generous right to shelter laws and its sanctuary city status, the more we realize that those two things may in fact be in complete conflict with each other. Because the idea of helping people who've fled extreme poverty is incompatible with the idea of housing people who may have a dangerous criminal past they're hiding, especially when that criminal past involves exploiting some of the very same people that have now come here to New York. And let's say you're living in one of the city's shelters and you know that there are gang members there. Well, since the police are banned from even going into those shelters, how are you supposed to get help? And how are the police going to get rid of the gangs? They're not, because we're a sanctuary city, and that is a big problem.
You yourself have stated that if there is a Venezuelan migrant community in a neighborhood, then there's likely the Tren de Aragua gang. Why?
They built their entire enterprise off the backs of over 8 million Venezuelans fleeing Venezuela and other countries in South America.
And once the Tren de Aragua establishes...
So the most amazing thing about this asylum crisis is that here you have this gang, and the thing that they're looking for is a mass of vulnerable people who they can exploit. Well, that's what the asylum crisis is. And they've got access to those people once the city decides to allow them to live in our shelters because we don't do background checks. But it gets even worse because the city allows unlicensed vending to run rampant on many of our streets. This gang is taking advantage of our non-enforcement of our existing laws to co-opt people into working for them who have no choice and can't escape from them. Remember, they thought that they were getting on buses like this to come to New York and check into a shelter where they would be able to escape this gang. But no, the gang is here waiting for them, and they're using our system of lawlessness against these people. And it's not like this is some secret. Recently, a gang was discovered living in the Roosevelt Hotel, which is the welcome center for all new asylum seekers. If you come to New York and you're seeking asylum, from the moment you get off your bus or your train or your Uber or however you got here, you've got to go to the Roosevelt Hotel to get a shelter placement. And there are gang members there looking at people, sizing them up when they enter the system for the very first time. And what I can't seem to figure out is we've got so many people in New York that want to do everything they can to help the asylum seekers, but they want to try and do it while remaining a sanctuary city, and they fail to see the connection between gangs coming here and ruining the whole thing. That's what they're missing. And then you've got to add to that the fact that there are also people here who are in charge that believe that law enforcement of any kind is incompatible with people coming to America and trying to start a new life. What does that mean? How are those people supposed to stay safe from the gangs they've fled if police are the enemy? How's that going to work?
And once the Tren de Aragua establishes a cell within a community, what's their end game? What happens next?
Their end game really is to govern and control that area. So they're going to seize areas, they're going to seize apartments, they're going to seize abandoned buildings, they're going to take over the migrant care centers.
You know, the worst thing about this is that this isn't some new discovery that we've made. We've known all along that this is how this gang operates. And even though they might not be taking over as many apartments, just a handful of apartments like they are in other parts of the country, like in Colorado and in Texas, here they're co-opting many of the people that have come here looking for help and a fresh start. So they're co-opting people And that's what they're all about. And that's why even though this 7-point neighborhood plan for Queens, even though it's a great idea, it might not do much in the long run if the root cause of the problems that are being experienced there have more to do with a system that the city itself is facilitating. From not controlling and stopping the resale of stolen goods, to allowing criminals to get a free place to stay, which is their right even after they get arrested and spend time in the back of a police car. How else are these gang members getting arrested hundreds of times and they're still here if our laws aren't protecting them? And this gang of teenage criminals that live in the Welcome Center Roosevelt Hotel, they're all still here. The 20 of them have been arrested over 50 times when combined, revealing that not only is it a bad idea for our sanctuary city to allow gang members a place to stay right next to families with little kids, but this whole idea that police are somehow a problem for people that are immigrating to America, that's ridiculous, because now you've got the law-abiding living in these shelters where they think they're supposed to get help, but inside those very same shelters, you've got gang members controlling the entire environment. They're smuggling weapons inside these places, inside their backpacks, inside DoorDash deliveries, what look like DoorDash deliveries. And the only law and order in a place like that is gonna go to the strongmen that have taken it over. And the sad thing is, it only takes a handful of people to do this. It's not like we have millions of gang members living here. No, it's a small minority of people, but they're having a massive impact. And we've still got over 60,000 people living in our shelters who really could use help and would very much benefit from being able to rely on law enforcement to protect them, but they can't do that. What do you think about that? Is that why certain neighborhoods in town are being taken over by gang members who are exploiting people who they came here with, who are looking for a better life? Is that because the police aren't allowed anywhere near this? Is it because our laws are not allowed to stop it? Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.